Thank you for tuning in and taking the time to think about and listen and talk when you call in about subjects that can be challenging, and not everyone wants to address them, but they're important because they can be quite pervasive and they can be quite challenging and maybe even debilitating. But before I'm going to go into today's topic, I just want to tell you that sometimes these things happen in life that you really for a moment get a jolt, right? You just feel like, okay, sets things into a new perspective. Maybe you were just worried about, that you forgot to buy milk in the grocery store and you got really upset. Or maybe you were just mad at someone who forgot to call you on your birthday and sent you an email the day after. And so all these little tiny things in life that seem to be big deals. And then you hear a very dear friend telling you that their spouse just was diagnosed with cancer. And all of a sudden you feel like, wow, when I think about how she must feel and how he must feel having cancer and being young and having all of those, hopes and aspirations, and all of a sudden everything comes to a halt, you yourself think, well, I'm really grateful that I have my health and that I have really nothing big to worry about. And so that is exactly what happened this morning when my closest friend really called and told me that. And it made me realize that we do take so many things for granted, and we are spending so much time on our concerns and our worries that in the end are not necessarily life-threatening. They're not necessarily big issues, but we still keep focusing on them and giving them a lot of our energy. And I don't want to diminish the topic that we are having today, because it's a topic that I personally have suffered from, and I know a lot of you are suffering from this, but it's important to put it into perspective of realizing whatever we are afraid of in this regard, we can change it. And we are not in a life-threatening situation because of it. And I'm talking about two fears that are like an epidemic and that are diminishing our life experience and are diminishing ourselves. And those two fears are the fears of missing out and the fear of standing out. Now, these may appear like total different fears, have nothing to do with each other, but they actually are connected. And I'll show you that they're not only connected at their root, but they're also connected in the way we can resolve them and what we can do to overcome them. So the fear of missing out is ultimately, that scenario. You are having actually a perfectly fine day. You feel like everything is fine and good. And then maybe you feel a little bored scanning through your social media outlets. And all of a sudden you see, oh my God, they are having a party over here. And these other friends are down in South Africa on a safari. And the other friend, she's actually getting engaged. And all of a sudden you see this kaleidoscope of joy and excitement, and everyone has so much more fun, has a so much more interesting life than you. And you look around and you feel like, well, my home, my apartment looks pretty boring. My life is actually really small. Why did no one actually ask me to join them? And you go right there into feeling lonely and like a total loser from one second to the other. Now, since you have that fear now of regret and you feel like, oh, I don't want to have this again, you're not actually avoiding that, what triggered the fear. You're actually going more obsessively into looking at social media or asking your friends or trying to be up to date, because you feel the more I'm connected, the more I feel like I will not miss out. And that can literally become an obsession. And this is something that a lot of people are struggling with, because while they're telling themselves, well, I'm just really having a lot of friends and I just want to make sure, that I know what's up to date and what they're up to, in the end, it stresses them out. And just like a client of mine who really had everything going for her, she was, very well educated, she was beautiful, she was healthy, she had a great job, and she had the fear of missing out, which really clouded everything else. She was high performing, but as soon as she came home and checked on what other people were doing, she was down. She got even depressed because she felt that she and her life were not measuring up. So that's one fear that I think a lot of you can relate to. And the other fear is a fear of standing out. Now, the fear of standing out is that fear when you are, like in a meeting at work, and you just don't dare necessarily to say something or to make a comment because you don't want to get all the eyes on you, or you're going to your in-laws, and maybe maybe the father-in-law is a staunch Republican, and even though you are a Democrat, you're not daring to go into any political discussion, and you're just nodding and smiling friendly when there are any comments about the president because you feel like you don't want to rock the boat. Or you're dropping off your kids at school and you're always wearing beige or black because you don't want to look any different than anyone else, but you also don't really want to connect to the mothers or fathers that are showing up there because, again, you don't want to get too much attention. Now, the fear of standing out is not necessarily the same as hiding out. The fear of standing out is often related more to you do want to belong, but you want to blend in and fit in to belong. You want to be one of the crowd and not necessarily the one that gets, the leadership torch or gets really all this attention. So you just want to be somehow connected without necessarily being seen as a unique individual, because that makes you very uncomfortable. Now, that is also a very pervasive fear because it really is common that we have more that view on what do I need to be in order to get accepted than what do I want to be in order to be myself. Now, what these fears have in common is something I'm just writing in my new book about different survival patterns and survival archetypes. What they have in common is the archetype of the chameleon. And the chameleon is basically an archetype that is really good at looking around and wondering what's out there that I need to somehow be like and adapt to in order to be liked and in order to be a part of. And so that pattern of wanting to belong at all costs, the pattern of tell me who I need to be, tell me what I need to do in order to be lovable or likable or acceptable, that is a pattern that creates all those fears. And it's a pattern also that in many ways got worse over time as social media became more prevailing in our lives, especially the fear of missing out. Now, I do know from personal experience that my first time of the fear of missing out, before it was even mentioned or known as FOMO, the fear of missing out, was way before Mr. Zuckerberg was even in diapers. I had that fear when I was 13 years old, and it's certainly a fear that I think is very, very ancient. It's like a tribal consciousness. It's this need to want to belong. And with the rise of social media, it's of course much easier to look at all the possibilities out there. And unfortunately, it's also much easier to get distracted and feel like, well, you should be here and you should be there, and there are so many choices, and it just augments the fear. And I'm going to tell after the break more about my first fear, but it's certainly something that was only one issue and one myth. Concerned about missing out, in any given hour, 30 or 40 different things, depending on how many friends you have on your Facebook or Instagram or so on. And the fear of standing out also became worse because individuality is not necessarily so much asked for. There is a greater sense of you need to be a part of the tribe. You need to be fitting in with either, being that what's right now fashionable, by talking a certain lingo, by looking a certain way, this orientation to being what's expected from you and not wanting to be any different and not wanting to be labeled as different is also something I think became more and more prevailing in the last few decades. So I think we know what we are struggling with. Now, how do we resolve it? Well, after the break, I'm going to tell you about three F's on how to resolve these fears, which are all about friendship and freedom and fulfillment. So stay tuned. I will be right back. Are you struggling with the fear of missing out or the fear of standing out? Do you always look what other people are doing and feel bad about your own life? Or do you wonder who you need to be to not get negative attention and therefore hold yourself back and maybe also really suppress certain things inside of you that you know are there, but you don't dare to let out? If so, you're probably curious how you can overcome these fears or not. See, that's the problem with these fears. I mean, there are fears like, the fear of getting sick, or that fear of dying, or someone else that you love, that they're going to have an accident, or there may be the fear of, maybe also something happening at work and you're going to lose your job. These are fears that can be all the time running your life. They can be just hanging over you and there is no real relief. Well, maybe you go to the doctor when you're afraid of getting ill, and 5 minutes later you wonder, well, was this really enough? And maybe I should go to another one, or maybe I should go again. So there is no real relief. You just really stay under that cloud. Now, the fear of standing out and missing out often is a little bit more contextual. And unfortunately, it feels also there is a way out. There is a way to not feel it. So, for example, when you are scanning and looking for what other people are doing, and then you find that they actually don't do anything interesting, well, in that moment, you may feel better. Or maybe you are the one who feels like, wow, look, what I'm doing right now and what I'm posting right now is the best of all worlds. So I win. And then you don't feel like you're missing out again. And so there is a little bit that sense of, I know I can quench this fear. I know I can stop it from bothering me. Same thing when you don't say anything, or when you just, survived another gathering where you didn't get any kind of judgment or some critical look thrown at you. It again feels maybe like a relief. This is why people that are struggling with the fear of missing out and the fear of standing out often don't look for help, simply because they do have a way to self-medicate, you could call it. Now, the truth is, though, that unfortunately both fears are at some point becoming like an obsession. It's almost like an addiction, where you do feel like, I need the drug, I need the relief, I need to know that I'm safe, I need to know that I'm interested, I need to know what other people are doing. And that can be in itself even more consuming than any other fears. So it is really a good thing to start at least being aware of the fact that this fear is holding you hostage in your life. It makes you smaller. It makes your life look more gray. It makes you look more invisible. All of those things that you're not born to experience. Life is too precious for that. And so looking at what can I do to overcome it? What can I do to actually see an alternative in it? That is something that we will talk about now. And the first step to change, I believe, is always awareness. And in order to get awareness, it's always good to ask questions. So the questions that I would consider for you to ask yourself are questions that are basically making you look at what you're doing and be a little bit more aware of why you're doing it and what it does to you. So, for example, ask yourself very simply, what is the price I'm paying for having those fears and having those habits and those patterns? What is it really what's happening in my life? So, for example, you may say, well, you know what? I'm actually never really present. Even when I'm out and I'm hanging out with my boyfriend, girlfriend, or just friends, I still check. I still look. Even when I'm in the bathroom, I'm on Instagram. Even before I go to bed, I need to know that everyone also is tucked away and I'm not the only one who is already hitting the pillow. And so these are things that make you constantly not be present in your life. And you're not present with the real world or that what's tangible around you. You're much more in the virtual world. And therefore, in some ways, you could say you're really missing out. Or maybe you feel like that you're never comfortable with yourself. You're never comfortable in your own skin. In fact, it is weird that on the one hand, you really wonder how you need to be in order to not stand out. But when you're by yourself, you cannot really feel yourself because you don't really pay so much attention to your own opinion about yourself or who you really are. You only measure yourself in the size that you're allowed to be, that voice that you're allowed to have or not allowed to have based on those that are surround you. So maybe you're feeling like you have a harder and harder time being by yourself and connecting to yourself. Maybe you're noticing what it does to you is also that you have more and more a sense of feeling that you're always running behind something and at the end that you're losing. Maybe you're feeling more and more that you have a sense of depression, that you're more anxious in your life, that you're feeling more, no matter how much effort I put in there is always more that I should be doing. There is always more excitement out there than inside of me. And at the end, you just feel maybe even hopeless. And there are studies that have clearly shown that people that are already starting out feeling a little bit insecure or bored with their lives, that they can, through these fears, end up in real serious depressions and serious social anxiety issues. So it's something that has effects, and it doesn't have to be this way. So then just ask yourself, so if you think about continuing with this fear of missing out, what are you going to miss out in your life on? Just think about what is actually what you're really missing out on if the fear of missing out is running your life. And the other question you want to ask yourself, who is really standing up for you when you're afraid of standing out? And those two questions may just be something that really make you realize, well, the source of life, where life really happens, is within you and in your direct vicinity around you. And that's really something to focus on. But of course, we have to find out, well, why do we do it in the first place? And how do we do it in the first place? And for me, just the question on where did this all start and what is really what I believe about myself that makes it started is a really important one to ask, both of them. So for me, it was when I was 13 years old, as I mentioned before, and I was taller than everyone. I had a weird first name, Friedemann. I mean, who has Friedemann as a first name, which means man of peace? I was a little geeky and certainly not very secure in myself, and just like a typical 13-year-old teenager who was a little awkward. Now, there was this group of friends who just every other Saturday got together and had dinners, and always one cooked, and they did games, and there was fun, and I was jealous. I wanted to be a part of that group. Now, what was really so interesting about that is that fear of missing out was so great that I was willing to do whatever it takes to get into this group. And so these guys, these were all the guys who didn't mingle with girls at that time, and these guys had this genius idea that they created the point system. Now, they gave themselves always enough points to be a part of the group, but I had to earn my points. Let's say I had to earn 20 points in order to be invited again. And if I didn't have 20 points, then I wouldn't be able to get in there. And so randomly, they gave me tasks to do, carry my backpack, bring me some lunch tomorrow. And I did it. And then randomly, they took it away. Well, you were not funny enough. Oh, I don't like your sweater. And so it was a constant game, bait and switch, constantly feeling like under pressure. And so for at least a year, I really felt deeply that fear of missing out. And it's something that really consumed me. And it all came from that idea that the grass is greener over there, that I don't really have an interesting life, and that I need others to have fun. I need others to have something that they set up that actually then makes me feel like I belong and I do something worthwhile. But the problem is, of course, that it made me more and more almost like dependent and more insecure, because my security was all dependent on being invited or not. Until one day, I had this eureka moment where I just, used the four-letter word in German and said, no more. I'm going to look for other friends, and I'm going to do my own dinner parties, and I'm going to not want to be around these guys anymore. And that was a very powerful decision, just to bring that awareness to myself back, that I can actually create my own experiences and my own excitement, and I don't need these guys more. And guess what? They wanted to have me all the time at their parties, which I then also nicely declined. Well, sometimes you can also, be a little bit unforgiving, but it was a lesson that I think taught me a lot about how challenging it can be to have this fear of missing out. So what I would like you to think about is just, where could it come from you? Where do you have this fear of missing out rooted in your life? And where is the fear of standing out rooted in your life? Did you ever get ridiculed when you said something in your early years? Do you remember that you had to maybe sing a song and everyone was bursting out laughing, or you had maybe some weird clothes on that your parents gave you as a hand-me-down, and then everyone just made fun of you? What are events where you remember, I already felt that fear of standing out? It was a traumatic, or it was a memorable, significant moment in my life, and since ever then I'm carrying this. So when you think about that, and this is where this first word, this first F comes in, think about the fear as a friend. Now that's the concept, right? Because we think fear is a bad emotion, some miswiring in the brain, or some monster that's just attacking us constantly, or something wrong with us, period. But if you're thinking about the fear just as a little part inside of you that is still stuck in an old idea of yourself and the world, that is still traumatized by something that happened way back, if you think about the fear as a little friend that you are saying, you know what, I'm going to take care of you. I know that you're still thinking about other people have better lives, or other people should be seen but not you. I help you to overcome it. We'll talk more about how you can help the fear friend to do that after the break.